At her grandson's graduation, Martha Ellison took the mic, and announced she'd rewritten her will. Her son and daughter-in-law? Erased. Every dollar, every acre, every ounce of her legacy was now locked beyond their reach. The crowd froze. Tracy's smile shattered, and in 6 minutes, 78 years of silence turned into the loudest reckoning the family had ever seen. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The high school auditorium pulsed with slow, buzzing anticipation. Rows of families fanned themselves with glossy programs, the scent of hydrangeas and hairspray thick in the air. Stage lights bathed the podium in a gentle amber glow. From the second row, Tracy Ellison sat like a statue of elegance, chin lifted, shoulders pinned back, and pearl earrings sharp against her bobbed blonde hair. Just behind her, in the third row marked overflow seating, Martha Stonewell Ellison adjusted the hem of her pale blue cardigan. Her spine, still straight at 78, bore the posture of a retired school principal who'd spent decades commanding attention with a glance. She didn't need to be in the front row to see everything. She never had. 2 rows ahead, her grandson Caleb sat on stage, his black cap slightly askew, tassel glinting under the lights. His hands were folded in his lap, expression unreadable. It was the biggest day of his life, and he hadn't looked back at her once. From the side, Tracy turned her head, just slightly, enough to deliver the sentence like a surgical cut. "Don't clap, you didn't raise him." She didn't even look Martha in the eye, just dropped the words like poison into water, then turned forward again. A pause. Caleb's eyes flicked to the audience, past his mother, past Greg, his father, who blinked but said nothing, and landed somewhere over Martha's head, never touching her. Martha didn't move, not a blink, not a sound. From the aisle seat, Ava Monroe, the neighborhood PTA president with the kind of radar that picked up emotional static, watched Martha carefully. Her brows pulled together, a whisper of something like concern crossing her face. She elbowed her husband lightly, but he was too absorbed in the unfolding ceremony to notice. Back on stage, the principal tapped the mic, calling names one by one. When the name Caleb Michael Ellison rang through the auditorium, a wave of applause swept forward. Tracy stood first. Greg followed a second late, a perfect image of proud parents, front and center. Martha did not stand. Her hands remained folded, calm, unmoving. Instead, with steady fingers, she reached into her purse. The leather creaked softly. Only Ava heard it. From inside, Martha drew out a long, sealed envelope. Cream-colored, thick, no return address, just her initials on the back pressed in silver wax. M.E. She didn't open it. She didn't even look at it. She simply rested it on her lap like a stone she'd been carrying for too long. 2 months ago, she'd signed it. 1 week later, she had removed her son and daughter-in-law from every clause. 1 month after that, she established a scholarship in Caleb's name, using the last of the Stonewell estate's timber assets. It had been quiet, private, dignified. But now? Now her hands moved with purpose. The envelope felt heavier today. Not with ink or paper, but with 30 years of erased birthdays, unsigned school forms, and thankless tuition checks. It held every yes she'd given in silence and every no Tracy had made on her behalf. "Ladies and gentlemen," the principal's voice echoed again, "please welcome our valedictorian, Caleb Ellison." Applause, whistles, camera flashes. Caleb stood, adjusted his robe, and walked to the podium. He didn't glance toward her once. Tracy beamed like she was being photographed by Vogue. Martha's fingers curled around the envelope. Behind her, Ava leaned forward, her voice soft. "Are you all right?" Martha turned her head, the smallest smile on her lips. "I'm perfectly fine, Ava, but I think I'll be saying a few words too." Ava blinked. "You... what?" But Martha was already rising. She walked slowly but directly down the aisle. Her orthopedic shoes muffled against the carpet. Every step was measured, deliberate, like she'd been planning this route for weeks. She reached the side of the stage just as Caleb finished his final sentence. And to those who helped me along the way, thank you." The audience erupted again, and then they watched in confusion as a tall, silver-haired woman approached the principal at the edge of the stage. He leaned down. She whispered something in his ear. He hesitated. Martha handed him a folded card, her official invitation to the ceremony, a badge of legitimacy. Then slowly, reluctantly, he stepped aside. Martha took the microphone. Dead silence. Tracy's hands froze mid-clap. Greg sat back down, unsure of what to do with his face. Caleb stood at the edge of the stage, unsure whether to stay or walk off. Martha looked out over the sea of eyes. Her voice, when it came, was calm, clear, and utterly unshaken. "My name is Martha Ellison. I'm Caleb's grandmother. Some of you know me, most of you don't. And I suppose that's fitting." She paused. Then she slowly held up the envelope. "I brought something today. Not a speech, not a gift, just a truth." Tracy's eyes widened. Ava inhaled sharply, and Martha began to open the seal. The seal cracked with the soft finality of something that couldn't be undone. Martha didn't flinch. She didn't rush. She unfolded the document with quiet precision, her fingers smoothing the parchment as if it were sacred scripture. In a way, it was her truth, notarized and weighty, a lifetime folded into clauses and subclauses. The auditorium had fallen under a hush, the kind that didn't just mean silence, but suspension, like everyone was waiting to see if they were watching a breakdown or a beginning. Tracy's breath hitched audibly, her smile frozen like a photograph taken a second too late. Martha raised her gaze, met the principal's eyes, and with the decorum of someone who'd once disciplined entire classrooms with just a look, asked softly, "May I?" The man, a bespectacled, balding educator with too many years of conflict avoidance under his belt, hesitated. His fingers twitched near the mic controls. "I won't be long," Martha said, her voice low but firm. "I simply want to honor someone." That was the word that did it. Honor, a word schools were built to endorse. He gave her a reluctant nod and stepped back, palms lifted in surrender. She turned to the audience. Martha didn't adjust the mic. She didn't need to. Her voice had a cadence born of morning announcements and teacher-in-service speeches. It reached without shouting. "Thank you, Principal Nevers," she said, tone gracious but unbending. "I know this isn't standard protocol, and I do apologize for the surprise, not the sentiment." She took one breath, let it settle in her chest. "I'm Martha Ellison, Caleb's grandmother." A few heads turned. A few phones came up, recording, curious. "I want to start by thanking this school, your teachers, your coaches, your counselors, for guiding these young people with structure and encouragement. I know what that takes. I did it myself for over 40 years. Caleb stood off to the side now, frozen between retreat and return, his eyes fixed on her like he was seeing something unfamiliar that bore his name. "And I want to say," she continued, "how proud I am of Caleb. For his music awards, his robotics championships, his quiet focus. It's not easy to grow into yourself under pressure." She paused just for a moment, enough to shift the emotional register. "But I've learned something across a long life. Legacy isn't who you pose with. It's who pays the price." Gasps rippled. Tracy sat bolt upright, her smile vanished, replaced by a tight, mortified twitch. She reached for Greg's arm instinctively, as if to signal him, but he remained still. His mouth moved silently. "Stop." Martha didn't look at them. Not yet. She held up the envelope, now open. "This," she said, "is my last will and testament. Updated, witnessed, sealed, and signed 2 months ago. In it, I've outlined my legacy. Not the way others might tell it, but the way it was lived." Now her eyes finally turned. First to Caleb, then to Tracy. Because sometimes love gives in silence. Sometimes it signs checks behind closed doors. Sometimes it gets told to sit down and stay quiet at a graduation it helped pay for. A crack passed through Tracy's composure, like a porcelain figurine struck dead center. She looked around, suddenly aware of how many people were watching, judging, filming. Martha didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The silence did it for her. "I was told I didn't raise him," she said evenly, "and maybe I didn't. Not the way people mean. But I built the staircase, every step, every opportunity, every unpaid acknowledgement. I don't need credit, but I won't be erased." A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Greg looked down at his hands like he didn't recognize them. Ava Monroe, sitting half a row back, stared in awe, phone gripped tight in one hand, but she hadn't pressed record. She was too stunned to think tactically. Martha carefully placed the open will on the podium and stepped back, not in retreat but in poise. "This is not for applause," she said. "This is a reminder that truth waits, and eventually it asks to be heard." The principal stepped forward again, unsure whether to take the mic back or just disappear into the floor. But before he could move, Tracy stood. She spoke loud enough to reach the front 3 rows. "This is inappropriate." A few heads turned toward her, some sympathetic, some not. And Martha, without looking at Tracy, simply closed the folder and said calmly, "What's inappropriate is rewriting history with a Sharpie and calling it love." The air thinned. Caleb looked like someone had punched a hole through the paper screen of his world. The moment Martha stepped down from the stage, the room shifted. Not loudly, not with panic or applause, but with that low-voltage ripple people feel when truth enters a room that wasn't ready for it. She didn't look left or right. She didn't need to. Every eye found her. Every whisper clung to her back like static. But her thoughts weren't in that room anymore. They were 12 years behind her, tucked into a cedar file drawer in the back bedroom of the Stonewell house, beneath property deeds and tax forms. It was there, on her knees at midnight, lit by the faint glow of a banker's lamp, that she'd first written the check that changed everything. $7,950, Lexington Preparatory's tuition freshman year. Made out to the school directly, no memo, no fuss. She never asked Greg to pay her back. She only asked for discretion. And he gave it. Just, "Don't let Tracy know," he'd muttered one night, standing in her kitchen, hands shoved deep into his blazer pockets like a boy caught sneaking in late. She wants to feel like we're doing it ourselves." Martha had smiled politely and sliced another piece of lemon pound cake, because arguing with men like Greg was like shouting into a screen door. Everything went through, and nothing stuck. The second check came a month later, $1,200 for Caleb's cello lessons. The third? A robotics camp in Nashville, then private ACT tutoring, a field trip to the Kennedy Space Center. Each one carved quietly from the remains of her family's timber holdings, a fund she'd once earmarked for her own retirement travel. Italy, maybe Montana. By the time Caleb was a junior, the tally had passed $63,000. Not once had she asked for acknowledgement, but that didn't mean she hadn't wanted it. She remembered one spring evening, standing at the back of an auditorium not unlike this one, watching Caleb bow after a cello solo that had brought a dozen parents to tears. Tracy had been in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a pearl-stitched handkerchief like she'd birthed Yo-Yo Ma himself. Afterward, outside in the parking lot, Tracy had looped her arm through Greg's and said just loud enough for the lingering crowd to hear, "We worked so hard to give him this life. All those sacrifices paid off." Martha had stood 10 feet away, alone, smiling for appearances, clutching the donation stub in her coat pocket like a dead bird. That night, she'd driven home in silence. No radio, just the hum of her aging Buick, her knuckles white on the wheel. She didn't cry. She never cried. But her chest had felt hollow in that quiet way, like a house after the furniture's been moved out but before the lights are turned off. And still, she gave. Still, she signed. Still, she stayed quiet, until Deacon Henry Briggs came to visit. He was a man of few words, but the ones he chose tended to settle in people like stones at the bottom of a well. They'd been sitting on her porch that Sunday, she with her mint tea, he with his silence, when he finally said, "You keep pouring water into a glass someone else is holding." She looked up from her knitting. He met her eyes. "Silence grows weeds, Martha. You let them grow too long, they start pulling the house down." She hadn't responded, but she'd stopped knitting, and the next morning she'd called her attorney. Back in the auditorium, Caleb still hadn't sat down. The will trembled slightly in his hands, more from the weight of its implications than its paper. Martha returned to her seat. Ava Monroe leaned toward her, lips parted like she was about to speak, but Martha shook her head softly. Not now. In the second row, Tracy's jaw was locked tight, her knuckles white around her clutch. She whispered something harsh into Greg's ear. He didn't answer, because for the first time in a very long time, Greg wasn't sure who the real villain was anymore. The gavel of Martha's decision didn't fall at the graduation podium. It had already struck quietly 2 weeks earlier in a private office tucked above a downtown Lexington law firm with dusty crown molding and the smell of old leather files. Martha sat in a high-back chair that groaned under her weight, not from size but history. She wore her good tweed coat and a brooch shaped like a book, an old retirement gift from her teachers. The file folders spread across the walnut desk in front of her were neatly labeled in block print. Stonewell Estate, Educational Fund Transfers, Beneficiary Revocation. Across from her, Judge Linda Sharp, retired family court judge turned estate attorney, was the only woman alive who could stare Martha down without blinking. She didn't wear robes anymore, but the authority still clung to her voice like iron filings to a magnet. "Let's walk through it again," Linda said, flipping to the final page of the revised will. "Clause 14C, if any party contests your decision, they forfeit everything," Martha finished flatly, folding her hands over her lap. Linda arched a brow. "No exceptions? No loopholes," Martha said, her tone level. Greg had his chance. He spent it swallowing his spine every time Tracy ran her mouth. Linda tapped her pen against her teeth once, then made a note in the margin. "You sure you want Caleb listed as a steward, not a beneficiary? That limits his direct control." "I want him to build something," Martha said, "not live off it." Linda didn't smile often, but that earned a faint curve at the corner of her mouth. They worked in silence for another hour, cross-checking trust disbursements, redirecting the land equity from her family's Appalachian property into youth programs for underserved kids, the same kinds of programs that Caleb had quietly benefited from, unaware who had made the checks clear. Robotics clubs, music outreach, reading enrichment. Linda looked up midway through the amendments. "You're not just cutting them out." "No," Martha said. "I'm cutting them off." Linda scribbled one last signature block and turned the folder around. Last page, the new foundation document, initial beside your name and sign at the bottom. Martha's pen didn't hesitate. Her signature was slow, careful. She dotted the I in Ellison like she was striking a final nail into something buried deep. When she was done, she leaned back, exhaled through her nose, and closed the folder herself. "You want a copy for your safe?" Linda asked. Martha nodded. "And one for Tracy." Linda blinked. "You want her to read this?" "No," Martha replied. "I want her to receive it." A silence passed. Linda drummed her fingers on the armrest. "Private delivery or—" "Mail it, certified. She's obsessed with appearances. Let her open it in the middle of her perfect kitchen, maybe while she's frosting another damn bundt cake for the PTA." That drew a real laugh from Linda. Short, sharp, honest. She stood and pulled a heavy cream envelope from a drawer, thick as cardstock, the kind that whispered legal consequence with every fold. "And if she calls me?" Linda asked, sealing it. "Send her to voicemail," Martha said, smoothing her coat. "Then send her the clause." Linda handed her a second envelope, the client copy, and placed it gently into Martha's canvas tote. The folder felt heavier than it should, but not burdensome, just final. At the door, Linda paused. "You could have done this without the mic moment." "I know," Martha said, her hand on the doorknob, "but I didn't want to die polite." A beat. "You want this to stay private?" Linda asked, her tone sharpening a hair. Martha turned, her expression unreadable. "Not yet." Greg Ellison had barely set his coffee down when the glass door to his office slammed open. Tracy stormed in like a gust of expensive perfume and fury, her heels clicking against the hardwood, her perfectly manicured hand waving a thick, cream-colored envelope like a legal summons. "She's trying to destroy us," she hissed, eyes bright with rage. "Do you even know what's in this?" Greg blinked, startled but unsurprised. He looked at the envelope in her hand, the one Martha had asked Linda to send certified, not as an announcement, but as a reckoning. "She changed the will, Greg. She cut us out, entirely." Tracy dropped into the leather chair across from his desk without waiting for permission. "And the clause, this insane clause that says if we contest anything, we lose whatever's left." Greg leaned back slowly, hands steepled under his chin. I know." Tracy froze. "You what?" He looked away, out the window, at the parking lot, at nothing. "I knew. About the school payments, the cello lessons, the tutoring, all of it. She helped. Quietly." Tracy shot up from her chair like she'd been slapped. "You knew, and you let me stand in front of all those people and thank us? You let me build a narrative, Greg, a brand of sacrifice and family strength, and all this time she never asked for credit," he said quietly, "and we never offered it." Tracy's mouth opened, closed. Her breath came in short, tight bursts. "You coward!" The word landed like a pin dropped in a church. Greg didn't flinch. She paced, arms crossed, eyes darting, thinking like someone raised to win at optics, not truth. "We need to speak to someone. We can't let this stand." Greg said nothing, so she pulled out her phone and dialed their family attorney. Across town, Linda Sharp answered on the second ring. "Hi, this is Jennifer Sullivan, representing Gregory and Tracy Ellison. I'm calling about the recent estate amendment sent to my clients." Linda cut in. "It's enforceable," she said, cool and precise. A silence stretched over the line. I haven't even told you what I'm asking," Jennifer replied, voice faltering. "I know. And it's still enforceable," Linda said. "My client's documents are airtight, witnessed, and properly filed. Clause 14C is standard in preventative estate revisions. Any legal contest will result in immediate forfeiture. I suggest your clients read more carefully before they try to rewrite history in court." Then Linda hung up. Back in Greg's office, Tracy stared at her phone like it had betrayed her. Greg rubbed his eyes. "Maybe it's not about us anymore." Tracy whipped around. "Everything is about us. Do you know how this looks?" He looked at her, and for the first time in years, he didn't try to soften what he said. "It looks like someone's finally tired of being erased." Tracy's face twisted into something unfamiliar, something unguarded. For a second, it looked like she might cry, but she didn't. She buttoned her coat and stormed out without another word. That same afternoon, while the Ellison home simmered with tension and calls to damage control, Martha stood in the Lexington Public Library's historical wing with a quiet smile on her face. A new plaque had just been installed in the foyer, the Caleb Ellison Emerging Scholar Fund, sponsored anonymously. The first recipients, a pair of 7th graders from the East Side, would start robotics camp in June. Ava Monroe, watching from across the atrium, leaned toward the librarian beside her and whispered, "She lit a fire under the HOA and I'm loving it." Later that night, Greg sat alone in his car in the driveway, the house lights warm behind him, the porch empty. He scrolled through his texts. One sat unread at the bottom of the screen, from Martha. "You didn't stand up for me. I'm standing for myself." It was just past 9 when Martha heard the knock. 3 soft taps, polite, as if the visitor wasn't sure if they deserved to be there. She didn't move at first. Let the sound settle, see if it would go away. But it came again. This time, steadier. Through the window, porch light casting soft gold across the hedges. She saw him. Greg, suit wrinkled, tie loosened, coat draped over one arm like a man who'd driven too far in silence. Martha opened the door slowly, not cold, but not warm either. Her presence filled the doorway with quiet authority, as it always had. "Evening," he said. She nodded once, wordless, then stepped aside. Greg walked into the living room like a man visiting a museum, cautious, reverent, afraid to touch anything. The house hadn't changed, the same books on the shelf, the same crochet runner across the back of the couch. But something was different, like the air had shifted loyalties. "I didn't come to fight," he said, standing near the fireplace. "I came to explain." Martha said nothing, just sat in her armchair and waited. Greg cleared his throat. "Tracy," She was just overwhelmed. Everything's always been pressure with her. Status, image, the school, the clubs, the fundraisers. She was trying to keep it all together. "And I was invisible," Martha said calmly. Greg blinked. "That's not what I meant. But it's what you allowed." Her voice wasn't sharp. That would have been easier. No, it was measured. Each word placed like a brick in a wall he'd never climbed. Greg lowered himself onto the couch, hands folded. "I should have said something." "You never said anything. Not when she stopped inviting me to his birthdays. Not when I was told to wait outside parent-teacher meetings. Not even when you let her take credit for things she didn't pay for." "I just wanted peace," he said, voice cracking slightly. "And I wanted dignity," Martha replied. "We both lost." Greg looked down at his hands, those same hands that had once held Caleb as a baby, shaking with nerves and hope. Now they just trembled. Martha stood and walked slowly to the cabinet near the window. She pulled out an old photo album, thick and worn at the corners, and brought it back. She placed it in his lap. He opened it. The first few pages were full. Caleb as a toddler, fingers sticky with cake. Caleb at 5, missing teeth and holding a Lego trophy. Caleb at 8, in a plaid shirt too big for his shoulders, arms wrapped around Martha's neck on the front porch. But somewhere near the 10th birthday page, the photos stopped. The rest of the album was blank. Greg ran his fingers over the empty pages. "That's when she cut me out," Martha said, sitting back in her chair. "So I cut the pictures." His mouth parted like he might speak, but he didn't. The weight of omission hung between them, 12 years of it, thick as smoke. "I didn't know how far it had gone," Greg finally said. "You knew enough," she answered. They sat there, the clock ticking softly behind them. Outside, a dog barked 2 houses down. Inside, grief settled into the cushions. Greg stood slowly, the album still in his hands. "I'm sorry," he said, voice raw. Martha didn't respond. She didn't need to. As he walked to the door, she watched him like she was seeing someone else's son, familiar but faded at the edges. He paused at the threshold, turned back. "Is there any way to fix this?" Martha's eyes didn't soften, but they didn't harden either. Not with words. It was early evening when Caleb showed up. No text, no call, just the sound of gravel crunching under worn sneakers as he made his way up the walk. Martha saw him through the lace curtain, but didn't move to open the door. Not yet. Let him knock. He hesitated at the top step. His hand hovered in the air like he was still deciding what this visit was. Then a soft knock, twice, unsure, different from Greg's, less practiced, more real. She opened the door. There he was. No cap and gown, no audience. Just a boy on the edge of manhood, with his mother's cheekbones and his father's posture, but something in the eyes was hers. "Hey," he said. She nodded. "Come in." He stepped into the living room, looking around like it held pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known he'd been solving his whole life. The smell of lavender oil, the framed quilt over the couch, a clock ticking softly in the corner. "I didn't know it was you," he said finally. She didn't ask what he meant. He knew she knew. "All those years," he continued, "the trips, the lessons, I thought—" He stopped. "She said it came from the family budget." Martha gestured toward the dining table. On it sat a worn accordion folder, its tabs labeled with surgical precision. Tuition, music, camps, travel, tutoring. She opened it slowly and slid it across the table. He sat. Hands trembling a little, he pulled out the first paper, a copy of a check to Lexington Preparatory, dated 9 years ago. Then another, $1,450 to a music conservatory. Then receipts for school supplies, airfare for a robotics regional in Ohio, handwritten notes signed, "For Caleb, quietly." There were letters, too. Some never sent. Notes to teachers requesting scholarship aid anonymously. A Christmas card from a cello teacher. "Thank you for helping Caleb grow. He's got the hands for greatness." He stared down at them, one after the other, the weight of them falling through his silence like bricks. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, voice hollow with hurt and awe. Martha sat across from him. Her posture hadn't changed, but her voice softened like silk warming in sunlight. "Love doesn't demand credit," she said, "but it remembers." He looked at her, really looked. Not past her, not through her, but at her. His lip quivered. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." "You weren't supposed to," she said. "That was the deal." A beat of silence, and then, like a dam finally giving way, Caleb stood, pushed the papers aside, and pulled her into a hug, tight, tearful, wordless. His chin trembled against her shoulder. She held him, one arm across his back, the other gently resting against his spine. Not maternal, not dramatic, just true. When he pulled back, there was salt on his face and something else in his expression, something deeper than guilt, something like gratitude. "I should have asked more questions," he whispered. "You were a child," she said. "They fed you a script. You didn't know it wasn't yours." He nodded slowly. Martha stood and began carefully tucking the documents back into the folder, not hurried, not hiding, just closing the chapter. She didn't mention the will. He didn't ask. Outside, the porch light flickered once and steadied. As he stood to leave, Caleb paused in the doorway. "I want to come back, just to talk, or help around the house, or just be here, if that's okay." Martha looked at him a long moment, her eyes glinting with something both old and freshly restored. "Doors never locked." The envelope came on a Tuesday, thinner than Martha's had been, no wax seal. Just plain white legal paper folded with precision, bearing the aggressive scent of toner ink and desperation. The return address wasn't from Tracy, but from her attorney, embossed across the top left corner in silver serif. A name Martha recognized from neighborhood gossip and wine-stained fundraisers. Valerie Dunham, Esquorn, Lexington's reigning queen of strategic restraint. Martha didn't blink. She poured herself a cup of tea first, chamomile, sat down at the dining table, and read, "Cease and desist from further contact with Caleb Ellison. Your continued emotional influence over him, especially following recent estate revisions and unapproved disclosures, constitutes undue interference in parental relationships and psychological distress to the family unit." Below it, a polite threat of escalation. Family court, protective orders, mediation if necessary. Martha let the letter rest flat against the wood. The heat from her teacup slowly curled one corner. She reached for her phone. Linda answered on the second ring, her voice crisp with morning energy and a lawyer's built-in edge. "I saw it. Just came through to my inbox, too." "She thinks I'm poisoning him," Martha said, almost amused. "She's not accusing you," Linda corrected. "She's warning you, which is sloppier, easier to counter." "You'll respond?" "Already did." Click, click. The sound of typing on the other end. "I've attached full ledgers of every financial transaction tied to Caleb's education," Linda continued. "Dated checks, receipts, witness donation slips. I've also included a legal opinion on your role as a non-custodial financial contributor, not legally bound, not overstepping, not obligated." "She won't read it," Martha said flatly. "No," Linda agreed. "But a judge would." Martha hung up a minute later, then folded the cease and desist into thirds, placed it gently into her junk drawer between expired coupons and rubber bands, and went outside to water her tomatoes. Across town, Tracy stared at her phone like it had stopped doing what she told it to. The response from Linda had arrived barely an hour after the cease and desist was sent. Too fast, too thorough, every number lined up, every document time-stamped, no gaps, no angle. The email ended with a single line. "My client has no intention of stepping back into silence, neither legally nor morally." Tracy paced the living room in socked feet, her face blotchy and hot. Caleb hadn't come home the night before. He said he was with friends, but she knew. Knew by the clipped tone, the new distance in his eyes, the way he left the kitchen light on. Something she'd told him not to do since middle school. Across the street, Ava Monroe was trimming hedges, earbuds in, but one eye always on the neighborhood. She scrolled her phone between clippings and stopped at a Facebook comment thread from the HOA's community board. There, under a post about positive family role models at graduation, Ava had written something simple. "Funny what people forget when the cameras come out. No names, no tags, but the thread exploded anyway. 4 likes, 3 DMS, and 1 text from Tracy. "What are you insinuating?" Ava didn't answer. She didn't have to. At Martha's house, the quiet hadn't changed. The porch light still flickered at dusk, the same wind chimes still danced in the corner, but now there was a new rhythm, a steady knock each Thursday afternoon. "Caleb." He never stayed long, an hour, maybe 2. Sometimes he brought groceries, sometimes just himself. Sometimes he said nothing at all, just helped prune roses or flip through old music sheets she'd kept from his lessons. He didn't ask about the will, he didn't bring up Tracy, he didn't need to. He showed up, and Martha, for the first time in years, didn't feel erased. Across town, Tracy sat alone in her kitchen, the silence thick with performance fatigue. No one called, no one posted her name on any list, no invitations came in. The Women's Legacy Circle had quietly archived her photo from the front page. She checked Caleb's location, still at Martha's. She slammed the phone down. The Lexington Community Arts Center had never been this full, not even during their Nutcracker fundraiser or the mayor's annual holiday address. But tonight wasn't about pageants or politics. It was the kickoff of the Emerging Scholar Showcase, funded in part by the new endowment named for a young man who had recently graduated without knowing who had made it possible, Caleb Ellison. He stood backstage now, fidgeting with the button on his shirt cuff, trying to shake the feeling that everyone out there expected something from him. But he wasn't the one giving the speech tonight. Martha was. He glanced through the curtain. She sat in the front row, calm and composed, wearing her navy blazer and the string of pearls she hadn't touched in a decade. Ava sat beside her, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the record button. Deacon Henry was a few rows back, leaning on his cane, steady as ever. The MC tapped the mic. "Before we close this evening, we'd like to welcome someone very special to say a few words about community, legacy, and quiet impact." Before she could finish, Tracy stood. No cue, no permission, just a surge of desperation masked as control. She marched toward the stage, heels clacking like punctuation. "I'd like to speak first," she said, reaching for the mic with a rehearsed smile. The MC, flustered, stepped back. Tracy turned to the crowd, lips tight, eyes scanning for allies. "I'm Caleb's mother," she began, her voice sharp beneath a sugary veneer. "And I think it's important we all understand what's really going on here." A slow ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Caleb stiffened behind the curtain. "She's manipulating him," Tracy said, gesturing toward Martha. "This whole spectacle, this scholarship, this so-called generosity, it's a show, a punishment. You think this is noble? It's revenge dressed up as virtue." The room froze. Ava's phone was already recording. From the audience, Deacon Henry shifted. The wooden legs of his chair creaked as he stood, each movement deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was gravel dipped in honey, aged but unwavering. "This woman," he said, pointing to Martha without raising his voice, "gave not for applause, but for change." Silence. "She didn't need her name on a plaque," he continued. "Didn't need to be thanked in speeches or shown off in pictures. She gave because someone needed a ladder, and when they climbed it without looking back, she didn't pull it down. She built another one." All eyes turned to Martha, who hadn't moved. Tracy's lips quivered. For a moment, her mask slipped, but she caught it, fast and tight, and then, without another word, she turned and stormed out. Her heels echoed all the way to the exit, but no one followed. Not even Greg. Behind the curtain, Caleb inhaled shakily. Then he stepped out. Not to speak, not to correct, just to stand beside his grandmother. He walked up to her seat, didn't ask, didn't hesitate, just placed a hand gently on her shoulder. She reached up, gave it a soft squeeze. That was their thank you. Ava leaned toward Martha as the applause slowly resumed. "That's going viral," she whispered, nodding toward her screen. "Already tagged by the local paper." Martha didn't answer. Her eyes were on Caleb, the boy she didn't raise but never stopped lifting. It was just past midnight when Martha sat down to write. The house was still. No ticking clocks, no hum of appliances. just the faint creak of floorboards and the soft rasp of her pen gliding across linen stationery. She hadn't written a letter like this in years, not since her husband's passing, but this wasn't a goodbye. Not exactly. It was a boundary, a gift, a truth. Dear Caleb, this is the letter I never meant to write because I always assumed love would find its way through moments, not paper. But moments are fragile. They get interrupted, rewritten, forgotten. So I wanted this one to live somewhere solid. She wrote slowly, but without hesitation. She told him about the day he was born, how she'd waited on the hospital's second-floor balcony with a newspaper and a cinnamon scone, too nervous to sit still inside. She told him how he hummed before he could speak, how he built entire cities out of shoeboxes and string, how he once gave $1 bill to a kindergartner who'd lost their lunch money and told no one. Then she told him about the silence, the years when birthday cards went unanswered, when school events didn't have an extra ticket, when his parents stopped telling him she'd called. I never stopped loving you, she wrote, but I did stop expecting them to let me. She didn't mention the will, didn't mention Tracy, not once, but at the end, in handwriting steady and sharp, she wrote, "This fund I've created is for your future, not as a gift, but a baton, to help others climb the way you did. It's yours to manage, not to spend. That's the boundary. Because legacy is only generous when it stays honest. If you never speak to me again, I'll understand. But if you do, let it be on your own terms. With love, always, M.E." The next morning, Linda stopped by. She didn't knock, just let herself in like she always had. She poured herself coffee in silence while Martha folded the letter, slipped it into a navy envelope, and placed it inside a small wooden box lined with velvet. Linda took the envelope and placed it in her briefcase. "I'll handle the trust updates," she said. "No rush," Martha replied, buttoning her sweater. "He'll get there when he gets there." Linda paused, hand on the case. "You're doing it quietly." "I'm doing it correctly," Martha corrected. It was 3 days later when Caleb showed up. No warning, just a soft knock and a paper bag with tomatoes and basil seeds. "You said you were going to redo the beds," he said, holding the bag like a peace offering. Martha didn't speak, just opened the screen door wider. They spent the afternoon in the backyard side by side, hands deep in soil. No big words, no lectures, just quiet coordination, the kind that lives in people who've decided there's nothing left to prove. At one point, he looked up, dirt under his nails, and asked, "Did you always know I'd come back?" "No," she said simply, "but I planted things anyway." He smiled. A real one. The first she'd seen since he was 10. When they finished, they sat on the porch with lemonade and aching knees, watching a bee hover over the fresh tomato starts. Caleb didn't mention the letter, but his eyes did. There was something heavier in them now, but steadier too, like he'd read a version of his own story that finally made sense. Martha reached over, brushed a speck of soil from his cheek. "You missed a spot." He laughed, unexpected, bright. It filled the space between them like music from a closed room finally opened. She didn't cry, but she smiled in a way she hadn't since before he knew what the word legacy meant. Linda Sharp didn't dress for war. She dressed for finality. Black turtleneck, slate gray slacks, no jewelry except her wedding band from a husband gone nearly a decade. Her hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun. The folder in her briefcase wasn't thick, but it was dense, with proof, precedent, and time-stamped truths. The motion that had been filed by Valerie Dunham, Tracy's attorney, was thin, a last grasp at something that had never belonged to them in the first place. The language was vague: emotional coercion, misrepresentation of financial boundaries, undue influence over a legal heir. Linda read it once, then twice, just to be sure it was as desperate as it seemed. By noon, she'd filed her reply with the Fayette County Superior Court. 17 pages, every clause cited, every amendment tracked, every donation documented. Clause 14C was printed in bold at the top of page 3. Any party who challenges this estate in part or in full shall forfeit all associated privileges, claims, and designations as outlined in appendices A through E. There was no room for ambiguity, no cracks to slip through. The court declined Tracy's challenge the next day. No hearing, no mediation, no press release. Just a quiet one-line ruling filed into the system at 9:16 a.m. Motion denied. Beneficiary contest is unenforceable under binding clause. Parties are advised not to refile under same grounds. Valerie withdrew as counsel by 4 p.m. Tracy didn't show up to the call. Greg did, but said nothing. The silence wasn't stoic anymore. It was hollow. He'd run out of explanations. At her kitchen table, Martha sliced strawberries for a pie she didn't plan to eat. Linda sat across from her, flipping through the court's official response. "They didn't even blink," she said, sipping coffee. "They had no reason to," Martha replied. "Truth doesn't flinch." From the back porch, Caleb watched the two women through the screen door. He didn't interrupt, just listened. That night, Deacon Henry came by with a jar of honey and a knowing smile. "You know," he said, settling into the rocker beside her, "you didn't just beat them. You taught her something." Martha raised an eyebrow. "Taught Tracy something?" He chuckled, low and warm. "Number Linda. She's a fine lawyer, but this was personal. You showed her where power ends and where legacy begins." Martha didn't answer, but she did glance toward the small wooden box tucked behind the books on the side table. The letter was still in there. Caleb hadn't returned it, hadn't mentioned it, and he didn't need to, because the next morning he showed up to her doorstep in a navy polo and khakis, a backpack slung over one shoulder and a clipboard in his hand. "I'm shadowing your after-school program this week," he said, as casually as if he'd always belonged there. "Linda said I should get familiar with the grant structure, thought I'd learn it from the source." Martha opened the door wide and handed him a banana muffin. "Hope you like chaos. The fourth graders just discovered glitter glue." By noon, Caleb was sitting on a carpet square in the basement of the community center, surrounded by 12 kids with big eyes and loud questions. One of them asked if he was Martha's grandson. He smiled. "Sort of. She raised the bar." That night, an email circulated in a private legal forum, shared by a junior associate who'd stumbled on the Ellison Trust case while researching estate immunity. The subject line read, "Masterclass in Ironclad Legacy Protection, Client M.E." Linda didn't comment, but she did forward it to Martha with a single note. "You've gone viral in law school." The envelope had arrived 2 weeks earlier, hand-delivered, no return address, printed on heavy paper thick enough to imply ceremony, not obligation. Martha had read it once, smiled to herself, and tucked it beneath the fruit bowl on her kitchen counter, where invitations usually went to die. She didn't need the stage. She didn't need the recognition, but she took the invitation anyway. And now, here she was, standing at the edge of a low wooden platform in the Lexington Cultural Hall, where the light caught on soft linen tablecloths and borrowed flower arrangements. Folding chairs filled every aisle. A printed banner above the podium read, "The Bridge Between Generations, Honoring the Quiet Architects of Our Future." Martha adjusted her lapel pin, just a small gold apple, the same one she'd worn for decades as a principal. Her walker, unused for most of the year, stood folded behind the curtain, just in case. The MC stepped aside and Caleb took the stage. His voice didn't boom. It wasn't polished, but it didn't need to be. It was steady, and that was more than enough. "She didn't raise me," he began, glancing out across the crowd, "but she built me." A hush swept the room like wind through wheat. "She wasn't at my football games. She didn't walk me to class. She wasn't on the stage at my graduation." He paused, then smiled. "But she was behind every door that opened, every lesson I could afford, every trip I didn't know someone had paid for." Front row, Ava Monroe wiped her cheek and tried to pass it off as allergies. She failed spectacularly. Caleb continued, "This event is about legacy, about the people who invest in others with no guarantee of applause, no spotlight, just purpose." Then he turned and extended his hand. "Please welcome my grandmother, Martha Ellison." The applause wasn't thunderous. It was rising, like something long overdue finally catching up to itself. Martha stepped up slowly, gripping the railing. No rush. She reached the podium, steadied her breath, and looked out at the full room. Not a hint of bitterness touched her face, just clarity. "I've never been good at short speeches," she began, "but life has a way of giving you long stories whether you asked for them or not." The crowd chuckled softly, leaning in. "I spent years believing legacy was something we left after we were gone, but I've come to believe it's something we choose while we're still here." Her gaze landed on Caleb, sitting now near the edge of the stage. His eyes didn't waver. "I didn't raise him, but I left lights on along the road." A beat. "And sometimes, when you love someone, that's enough." Another pause. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded check, sealed in a plain white envelope. "My speaker honorarium," she said. "It's been redirected to a fund that doesn't exist yet. It's for someone else's child. Caleb's maybe, someday. Whoever needs a library card or a book of their own or a voice that says, 'I see you.'" There wasn't a sound in the room except for a sharp inhale from Ava, who'd long since abandoned all attempts to stay composed. Martha stepped back from the podium. No bow, no wave, just a nod. In the back of the room, Linda Sharp watched from the shadows, arms folded, lips pressed into something halfway between pride and disbelief. She didn't clap. She didn't need to. Her nod meant more than the noise. And Tracy? Tracy was nowhere. She hadn't RSP'd. No call, no text, no seat saved in the second row. But Martha hadn't expected her. Some absences are louder than presence. The pen didn't hesitate this time. Martha signed her name in clean, deliberate strokes, steady despite the slight tremble in her fingers. Her handwriting had aged, like her voice, like her patience, but not her resolve. The paper beneath her pen bore the new title at the top, embossed in matte silver ink. The Stonewell Endowment, a legacy of quiet giving. She read it twice. Once for her father, who taught her to pay attention. Once for her mother, who taught her not to ask for permission. And not once for Greg. The name Ellison had been formally removed, not out of bitterness but clarity. Stonewell was hers. Rooted in a family that never made headlines, only foundations. Timber, textbooks, hard work. Across the desk, Linda Sharp held out the next page. "This is the clause," she said softly. "Final edition. Any attempt by blood relatives to interfere, emotionally, legally, financially, triggers full disinheritance, permanently." Martha nodded. "Add it." "Already done," Linda said. "You're just initialing now." With a steady breath, Martha pressed her pen to the margin. One flick, then another. Clean initials. M.E. "I assume you're still naming Caleb as steward?" Linda asked, though she already knew the answer. "Not heir," Martha clarified. "Steward." Linda smiled faintly. "There's a difference." "A big one," Martha said. "He doesn't get to own it. He gets to grow it." The last document was heavier, thicker parchment, hand-bound in deep green linen, a custom archival copy, commissioned by Linda, stitched with gold thread along the spine. "Your legacy binder," she said, sliding it across the desk. "Every clause, every fund, every transfer, every word in your own language, not legalese." Martha's hand rested on the cover like she was feeling the heartbeat of something she'd spent years building in silence. "Thank you," she said. Linda didn't say you're welcome. She just rose and started packing her briefcase. "Where will you keep it?" she asked over her shoulder. Martha didn't answer right away. She walked slowly to the hallway closet, pulled down a small metal fireproof safe, placed the binder inside, and turned the key. "Where secrets used to go," she said. "Now truths get the top shelf." Outside, the air smelled of fall, damp leaves and chimney smoke. Caleb would be by soon to help move her patio furniture into the shed. He didn't know about the changes yet. She'd tell him, eventually. But for now, he didn't need to carry it. He just needed to show up. And he did. Every Thursday. No reminders, no performance, just presence. She was pouring a glass of cider when the phone rang. Landline, the old one in the kitchen with the twisty cord. Only a handful of people ever used it anymore. She answered on the third ring. "Mom?" "Greg." His voice was soft, stripped. "She's gone," he said, barely louder than a breath. "She packed a bag. No note, just left." Martha stayed silent, not in triumph, not in judgment, just listening. She said she needed to start over, that I let things rot, that I never drew a line. He paused. The next sentence came out like something he'd rehearsed for years but never dared say out loud. I think I finally understand. The line went quiet. And then, can I come by? Martha looked out the window. The wind had picked up. The leaves were blowing in gentle spirals down the driveway. The spare bedroom no longer felt empty. The bed was now a bunk. A second-hand desk sat beneath the window, its drawers filled with spiral notebooks and colored pencils. On the wall, a corkboard bore a collage of class schedules, robotics flyers, and a crooked photo of 3 grinning teens in matching community center t-shirts, 2 of whom now called Martha's house their weekday home. It wasn't foster care, it wasn't a program, it was presence. She kept her rules simple: respect the house, wash your own dishes, and remember that silence was not a punishment here. Each morning, they left quietly for school, backpacks slung, earbuds in, muttering sleepy goodbyes through bites of toast. Each evening, they returned with questions about FAFSA, calculus, or how to get dried paint out of denim. And somewhere in the rhythm of those comings and goings, the house changed. It softened. It breathed again. The kitchen table, once set for 1, now hosted 4, sometimes 5, when Caleb dropped by on weekends from his dorm in Cincinnati. Martha never raised her voice. She didn't have to. The air around her still commanded pause. It was late October when Greg knocked again. He didn't call this time, didn't ask, just arrived, with a paper bag of apple cider donuts and hands shoved deep in his coat pockets like a man visiting an old crime scene. She opened the door. Their eyes met, his rimmed with exhaustion, hers unreadable. I brought these, he said, holding out the bag like an offering. Thought, maybe. She stepped aside. No welcome, no resistance, just room. In the kitchen, she poured 2 cups of coffee. No sugar, no fanfare. They sat across from each other in a silence that wasn't cold, but wasn't warm either. Just neutral, honest. Greg looked around. The fridge had drawings on it, crayon sunrises and penciled guitar chords. Someone's college acceptance letter was tacked to the bulletin board near the pantry. You're really doing this, he said. Martha nodded once. He looked down at his coffee. She said I let things rot, he muttered. Maybe I did. Martha sipped quietly. She said I never stood up to her. You didn't, she replied without edge. He didn't argue. They drank in silence, the clink of a spoon against ceramic the only sound between them. I'm not here to fix it, he finally said. I know it's not mine to fix. Then we understand each other, Martha said, setting her mug down. He nodded. Can I visit sometimes? Not for me, she said. For them. She gestured toward the hall where 2 backpacks leaned against the wall. Greg looked again, this time, seeing. Right. They didn't hug, didn't reach across the table, but when he left, he took off his shoes at the door. That same evening, Caleb stood by the front step with a duffel slung over his shoulder. He was headed back to school after a long weekend. Midterms, he said, and a group project that wasn't going to carry itself. He hugged her long. Not hurried, not performative. Just long. She patted his back twice before he pulled away. You'll be all right, she said. He nodded. You always are. Before he turned, he handed her a small paper envelope. Inside was a photo, the one from the keynote, mid-applause, Caleb's hand on her shoulder, both of them lit by the soft spotlight of acknowledgement, a moment neither of them had planned, but both had needed. Martha turned the photo over. On the back, in Caleb's handwriting, "Thank you for building the stage. I'll keep the lights on." She didn't cry, but she did press the photo gently into the frame Ava had delivered earlier that week. It was simple. White border, no plaque, no caption. It now sat on the mantel above a house full of quiet noise. The building was modest, brick-lined, 2 stories, repurposed from a former DMV, and now humming with a quieter kind of traffic, volunteers, tutors, restless teenagers, and soft-spoken adults who knew what it meant to need a place to start over. The sign above the main entrance read in clean serif, "The Stonewell Foundation for Youth Equity, established 2025. It was the launch ceremony. Folding chairs once again, a podium borrowed from City Hall, paper programs printed 2 days late because the printer jammed twice. Ava had nearly thrown the whole tray across the room. Martha stood at the front in a navy coat, flanked by fall chrysanthemums and framed by people who were never family but had become something better. Infrastructure. Caleb stood nearby in a tailored shirt and jeans, a man now, but one who still turned toward her when the nerves kicked in. Linda stood to the left, arms crossed, a pearl pin at her collar. Ava next to her in oversized sunglasses she swore were for sun glare. But everyone knew better. And Deacon Henry, leaning against the back wall, hat in hand, smile soft and unshakable. There were no reporters. No streamers, just community, just roots. Martha stepped to the mic. No introduction needed. She scanned the room, not for Tracy, not for Greg. They were never coming. But the room didn't feel lacking. "I used to think legacy was a thing written after us," she began. "Something others decided on our behalf." She paused. Let the quiet settle. "But I've come to believe that if we wait for others to write our legacy, we'll be edited out of it." Heads nodded across the crowd, a few murmurs of agreement, a tissue passed. "I gave where I could," she continued, "not because I was asked, not because I was owed, but because I was present." Another pause. "I am not here today because of blood. I'm here because of choice, because this city, this street, this building, this room taught me that the most lasting roots grow under concrete. You water them long enough and they break through." She turned slightly, her eyes finding Caleb in the front row. "Blood forgets," she said, voice unwavering, "but history remembers generosity." A breath passed. Then she stepped back. Applause didn't erupt. It rose, like steam from something slow and well-stirred. Then Caleb stepped forward, hands slightly trembling, a folded piece of paper in his grip. "She wouldn't tell you this," he said, voice low but steady, "but she writes poetry." A small chuckle from the front row. "She doesn't call it that. She calls it word-keeping. But I found this in the margin of one of her journals. She wrote it years ago. I asked if I could read it. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no." He unfolded the paper. "Let them say. I did not ask permission to pour light where they'd planted shadow. Let them say. I did not lower my voice to make others comfortable in their forgetting. Let them say. I gave anyway. And that somewhere, someone grew." Caleb's voice caught on that last word, but he finished it. Ava wiped both cheeks. Linda swallowed hard, jaw flexing. Deacon Henry nodded once and closed his eyes. The plaque behind the podium was uncovered an hour later. Etched in steel it read, "In honor of the woman they erased, and the legacy she built anyway." After the event, Martha didn't linger. She thanked the volunteers, hugged Ava without ceremony, nodded at Linda, and accepted a soft pat on the arm from Deacon Henry. Then she walked home. Alone. No crowd, no motorcade, no fanfare. Just the sound of shoes on sidewalk, the smell of distant chimney smoke, and the feel of wind curling under her sleeves. At the garden gate, the hinges gave a familiar creak, one she hadn't bothered to oil in months. She smiled at it. Routine was better than applause. She opened the door. Inside, the house waited. Quiet. Lived in. Whole. The framed photo of her and Caleb still sat on the mantel. The safe still held the documents. The bunk bed still had last week's laundry piled up on the bottom bunk. She exhaled. And in the quiet, not in triumph but in truth, the final line unfolded like a page she'd written years ago but never dared to say out loud. She didn't raise him. She raised the mic. And everything changed.